So the final session on sort of instance accidents, causality, there's been a lot of overlap with Randy's discussion, the stuff that I was talking about yesterday, in situational awareness and things. Let's put this picture up here. What do you think they've all got in common? Shout out, what do you think the common factor here is? Go. Humans, yeah, brilliant. Normally what happens is human error, pilot error, simple stuff like that. So this was Pegworth, 47 people killed, 74 injured when the pilot shut down the wrong engine and they landed just short of the airfield. It was easy to blame the pilots for being stupid, but actually there were lots of systemic issues. This is Deepwater Horizon. That day, when that exploded, they were getting awards for OSHA health and safety type stuff, slips, trips, falls, lost time, incident, fatality rates. Really low rate. Well done, guys. It's not quite like that. Human error in medicine in the States, third largest killer. It's too simple. And then here, which has got a lot of parallels with the diving community, 5,300 people fired by Wells Fargo because of fraud. And the CEO was investigated by, or the company was investigated by the financial institutions and said, hang on a minute, what's going on here? And he said, fire those people because they're committing fraud. He said actually the culture that they had created in the organisation was about making money and opening bank accounts. And the operators, the bank managers, were given two choices really: open up fraudulent accounts or get fired. And when they were doing the fraudulent accounts, it's a case of, I hope I'm not going to get caught out. They were being scored up to 4 times a day for the number of bank accounts that they were making up and opening. And it got to the stage where they were actually making up accounts on behalf of their clients. The clients would phone up and say, hang on a minute, I've got a new bank account. Where did that start from? And so, well, it's a glitch in the computer, sorry. Do you mind keeping it? Yeah, okay. And so they kept on going on like this. And you draw the parallels here with a mass market of diving where we don't have a follow-on system. All of these, it's easy to blame the individuals for their stupidity or their human error. But actually, these are systemic problems. And that's what came out of the investigations. So why should divers be any different? We often look at the individual at the sharp end and say, stupid. So the case up here, Rob Stewart, why did he get in on the dive that lived for the third dive of the day and end up as a fatality? Brian Buggy, which was mentioned yesterday by Simon, why would you not do your checks before you get in the water? Why did the instructor let them have a camera on the class? Why didn't they check these things? It's easy to pin it on the individual. This is me. This is what happens when you don't have any suit inflation gas at 55 meters. It hurts. And I was doing this research on safety. We go down the shot line, I press the inflate button, there's no gas left in the suit. It's like, oh, this is about 25 meters or so. It's okay, we'll carry on. I hadn't dived for a while, the weather was supposed to be rubbish, there's time invested, there's money invested. Anybody can thumb a dive for any reason at any time. That's the theory. In reality, it is much harder than that. And if you're an instructor and your boss is turning around and going, we've got to get people through the door as quickly as possible, oh, and by the way, if you don't like it, leave, because there's a whole bunch of other people around here who want to take your job. It's easy to identify the bad apples. And this quote here at the end from Sidney Pepper, reprimanding bad apples is like peeing in your pants. You feel warm and relieved first, but soon you look like a fool. These, you could say, were bad apples. This is a
video. His flights pushed the bomber far beyond its limits. Too low, too steep. Junior officers complained repeatedly. But it was after this flight, when Holland cleared a ridge by 30 feet, that one officer decided he had to be stopped. So Mark McGeehan was the co-pilot on the flight that day, as his wife and 3 sons watched.
Big parade on the airfield when that happened. And all the way through his career, he was an excellent rudder stick pilot, really good skills. And each time it was, we'll just promote him to somewhere else, or we'll move him somewhere else, we'll move him somewhere else. And in the end, everybody died on that aircraft. And they look back and say, this is a systemic problem. Last in 2017, the US Navy had 2 collisions in the Pacific. I think it was 17 people killed in total across the collisions. There we go, dead easy. Let's fire the captain, and we all solve the problems. And you sit there and go, it is not as simple as that. There are lots of issues that are involved. In fact, I've got a colleague of mine who's working in the US Navy now about trying to change the attitude towards safety. Don't pin it on the idiot. Because ultimately, we're pretty simple, and we need the audio for this. Our behaviour is a function of ourselves and the environment we're in.
And we give her a piece of cucumber.
Okay, up.
The other one needs to give a rock to us. That's what she does.
Give her a rock. Swap it over. Now this one's got a grate. The other one had cucumber.
Teaches the other one sees her. You give a rock to us now. Yes, you get a cucumber. Tests the rod now against the wall. You need to give it.
We humans are pretty simple creatures too. We like to be part of a group, we want to behave a certain way. And there are a whole bunch of videos out there around social performance. If people are behaving a certain way, you will copy them. If your instructors are behaving a certain way, you will copy them. You are a role model if you're in that position. So one of the ways that they address this in aviation, and they're starting to address in healthcare and oil and gas, is the application of human factors or ergonomics. And it builds up from the individual side, their activity, how they interact with the world, how they interact themselves, how they interact with a group. Then we go a bit further and say, how do they interact with the organisation? And then we say, how do they interact with the legality or legislation? And then we say, how do we interact with the culture? And having had a discussion earlier today, culture is a really interesting bit. You can't transfer cultures globally really easily. When United Airlines developed their crew resource management programs, they wanted to bring them out to the Far East, and they said, right, here we go, it's going to happen like that. And they all went, no, it's not. You don't do direct confrontation. You have to speak, and you can't lose face. This is a real problem. So this is where human factors traditionally is focused on, is the ergonomics, the interaction. But it's how we interact as part of a system. If we don't look at these wider pieces, we won't understand why people do what they do. You say, that's complicated. Let's look at Homer Simpson. How does Homer's job get done easily? Well, the other way around. Has somebody designed a system that's difficult for him? He's got loads of buttons, controls, lights. If you look at what the nuclear power stations looked like in the 70s, it wasn't too far about. Actually, you've got banks of displays. People have got no idea what was happening when it went wrong. He likes his donuts. Every hour he's got to have a donut. His blood sugar levels dropping. Oh, donut. There we go. And he's got Mr. Burns over his shoulder going, keep the power going, keep the power going, keep the power going. Well, all of a sudden, 2 minutes to the hour, his blood levels down like this. This all lights up. And he sits there and goes, oh my God, how do I deal with this? Don't shut it down, don't shut it down. I can't concentrate, don't shut it down. That is what human factors is about. It's making it easy for the individual. But when we look at incidents and accidents, there are a number of biases that work against us to find out what's really going on. So outcome bias. The harsher that something is in terms of an outcome, the more severe we judge it. If people come back off a dive and they've got a little bit of gas, we think, okay. If they don't come back because they've run out of gas, we really lay into them. But the reason the failure happened is exactly the same, but they survived, so we think, oh, it's okay. And as Randy's discussion, this normalization deviance, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And you drift a really long way. Hindsight bias, that's massive, because it's easy to join the dots, and I talked about this yesterday. When we go forward, we don't know what the future looked like. When we go backwards in time, it's really easy to spot what's going on. And this quote here from Hidden QC, Queen's Counsel, who's investigating a Clapham Junction crash. And they said, well, why did the guy jump the stoplights on the train? It was obvious that was there. And what his comment here is, There is almost no human action or decision that cannot be made to look flawed and less sensible in the misleading light of hindsight. It is essential that critics should be keeping themselves constantly aware of this fact. Why did it make sense? We don't, as Randy alluded, we don't get up in that morning and say, it's a great day to screw up. Fundamental attribution error. I'm awesome, you're rubbish when it all goes wrong. But when it all goes really well for you, that was lucky and I required skills. And we judge things differently based on what's happening to somebody else or what's happening to me. And we come up with excuses as to why we do certain things in terms of our behaviours, but we judge others differently. We've got to understand that local rationality. These are 4 of the 30 plus stories that are in the book. An experienced tech recently requalified diver on a 30-metre dive ran out of gas. Just as they come back out of a penetration and wreck, and he's like, oh, this isn't supposed to happen to cave divers. A full cave and cave CCR instructor forgot to put straw material in his canister. One of the major factors was he was going through a separation and his mind was not in the right place. It was somewhere else. And so he wasn't able to concentrate on what's going on. This is a buddy of mine who works in Tulum, Mexico, came back from doing a full cave class, blind exit with 3 students, and saw 10 DSD, Discover Scuba Divers, in the cabin area. It's like, what? Well, he thought they were open water until he got on the surface, and he said, no, this is our first dive. It's like, what? Went back to the shop and said, look, what's going on here? He was a bad guy, we'll fire him. It's like, hang on a minute, that guy wouldn't have done this without a manager's knowledge about what's going on. And then this one here is a story, Steve Bogart's exiting a cave in zero visibility, and the line disappears into the silt, and he's got no way of getting out other than letting go of the line and trusting his bearings, which on the second attempt he got right and made his way out. So each one of these stories is about 1,500 to 2,000 words long, and it provides the context of what's happening. So people may have come across this Swiss cheese model before, and it's drawn normally as a static image like this, where we have defences. And because we're human, we make mistakes, and those defences have got holes in them. But the real world is not static, it moves like this. And in fact, those holes open and close. And so now we've got multiple factors, as Randy highlighted, that are put in there. And this is, as it says, a simple model, because it shows this linear cause and effect. But in reality, it's far more complex than that. And in this case here is what's setting you up for a fall further up the chain from this point of view. And you'll be pleased to know, Randy, there is a diagram, a framework that you can hang all of those factors off. And this is what they did in the aviation world. The US Navy, US Marine Corps were unfortunately sticking a lot of aircraft in the ground, killing pilots in the process. And it was this 80% of errors or accidents are down to human error. And they said, no, actually, let's go and look at these accidents, investigations, and they codified this, taking James Reason's Swiss cheese model and saying, what are the bits that hang off the act of failure, the unsafe acts? What about preconditions for unsafe acts? What about supervisory factors? What about organisational factors? And this is what the goal of my PhD a few years ago was about, was to try and populate and create something like this. The difficulties, and most of the incident reports, maybe here, some here, almost nothing up here. And this point here from Don Harris and Lee Lin, talking about failures at the top end set people up for failure down here. And if you have constant failures at the sharp end down here, it is not a sharp end problem. It's a systemic problem. And one of the challenges in diving is there is nobody that looks up this area. It's a self-regulated industry which has got a vested interest in making sure that everything is transferred down here. And we don't have the data to show where those problems are. So if we consider that Swiss cheese model earlier and we build this up, actually these are spheres. Although I tried to get a graphic artist to do it as spheres, he said it's too difficult. So imagine these circles and spheres, and they've got holes in them, and they move around. So it goes back to your factors again, right? There are multiple factors that are there. One opens, one closes. It's no longer a problem. And what happens is we get these errors, failure points appear, and we potentially require a critical mass before it goes bang. And the difficulty again is we don't know what set us up for failure from that point of view. So it's this piece of focus on the good things and develop excellence. This is from a guy called Paul Shute in NASA, and again, aviation focus, and he's saying each one of these layers catches an error, and they propagate through. So actually, by the time we get to here, and the user, the pilot, whatever, the error gets smaller and smaller. But as you go through, you start adding other errors into it. And whilst people blame pilots, divers for making the errors, actually they're creating safety all the time. They are managing safety, but it's really easy to focus on this bit because it's really obvious. Going back to the point that Randy made about learning, from my perspective, fatalities are a rubbish way of learning. The decision maker is normally dead. You can't ask him why it makes sense because we've got that rationality. So we need to develop things in terms of non-fatal and non-fatal reporting, because this is where people go, oh, violations. Let's throw the book at them for breaking for making violations. Most people are not going out there with the I don't care, I'm too lazy. That it's a genuine being negligent behaviour. In fact, negligence is only a legal definition. You can't define the negligence because you've got to look at the context. So all of these areas are areas for learning, opportunities. And as a director for QC for Global Underwater Explorers, getting this sort of stuff through is gold dust in terms of improving the performance of the instructors and the students that go out. But we still come on to problems where people don't want to report because they don't want to seem to be telling tales on other people. And you sit there and go, how do we improve? Human error exposes the lethality within the system. Unless you've got gills, if you run out of gas underwater, you're very poorly placed. And we as humans create safety all the time. Fatalities here, they're all lots of multiple factors that come together that we don't really know how they're going to emerge. So safety is an emergent property of a system. You can't make a safe rebreather. You can't make a safe diver. You can't make a safe boat operation because people create safety, taking everything into account. But it's easy to blame the rule breakers that are out there. And this is the reason why the US Navy Marine Corps went to apply and look at these things differently. Now, interestingly, the ratio on ex-Air Force, brilliant, good best, a different mindset to operating aircraft. And they brought that down to about 17% in the total with the US Navy after they put together this HFACS program, Human Factors Analysis and Classification System, to identify much higher level failures and fix those early on. Then we look at why do people break the rules, and this is from anesthesia. And they said, well, actually, the reason why anaesthetists or anesthesiologists, or whatever you call them in the States, anaesthetists, is what's the value of the rule? Who wrote it? What happens if I break it? Do I get punished? And so actually, there's not much that goes on here, and I'm quite happy to break it. What's the anaesthetist like? And in fact, Fiona Sharp yesterday asked the question, what about personality testing? Bad idea. But actually, you can understand risk-seeking behaviours, and as a team, you can keep each other accountable. And then say, what's the organisation like? Do they sanction violations? Do they turn a blind eye to what's going on because they're not getting fatalities? Fatalities are a rubbish way of measuring safety. Someone, a friend of mine described, measuring safety by the number of fatalities is like measuring parenthood by the number of times you smack your child. It is almost of zero value, but that's what we use. And then this paper here that was published tail end of last year, and it's a great ability to look at a data set that sits within PADI and run by a number of researchers that are there, but there was no definition of violation. It was counter to best practice. Importantly, they only consider violations outside of training. And from my position within GUE, I'd love to know what happens inside training, because I can influence that, and then I can start influencing students to go on. I also know that if you did that inside the business, you'd open yourself up for discovery, and that's why you wouldn't do it. What they did identify is that there was a one-to-many and a many-to-one relationship. So trying to identify this factor, which was Randy taught, is nigh on impossible. The problem is that societally we want to blame and judge people. If you run an investigation, you will find what you are looking for. If you want to find somebody to blame, you'll find that. If you want somebody to sue, crack on. If you want to learn, well, that's a very different thing, because you've got to have a lot more information. And if you end up with focusing on the blame, as we find out, is people only tell half stories. They don't tell the whole truth. They tell what they can get away with. The cover-ups and reduce incident reporting. And I picked this because it's an easy one to get access to. This report is being prepared in the anticipation of litigation. Okay, so how open and honest do you think you're going to identify systemic failures from that point of view, especially at the organisational, dive centre or instructor level? Now, the US is a fantastic country when it comes to litigation. This is just last week, a report here, nurse made a mistake because she was trying to beat the system in providing care to the patients that are there. And she's now being charged with manslaughter for the errors that she's made. And in the UK, there was a doctor just recently reinstated where they used her debrief notes, her reflection notes, as evidence in a court of law. So when doctors make mistakes, they're encouraged to write a reflective journal to say, okay, what happened? Why did it happen the way it is? What can I do differently? That journal was then used as evidence in a lawsuit about what happened. And you think, this is just ridiculous. If that happens, and it probably will in the States, reporting will go down that way and the organisation will not learn. What we've got to understand is, what are those error-producing conditions? Focusing on errors, that's, as it says in the title, an error is a construct. We find something after the event to say, that was an error. But if we look at all of these areas and say, what led to that? That's something that we can do about. And in fact, on a recent dive, that my buddy was preparing their rebreather, and they're really busy doing stuff, and it's like, stop, you do your thing, and then we can carry on the brief. Because then, I'm not, I'm going to say something, but actually see it, say it, and it's quite hard to do, but you've got to be able to do it, because if that person is engaged in that activity, it's very hard for them to see what's going on. So some final parting thoughts which come from this guy here, Sidney Decker. Loads of his stuff that's worth reading if you want to be focused on improving safety. So, but here, what's the cause of an accident? It's like saying, what's the cause of success? We like to reduce things to simple, take a reductionist approach. This. Okay, if you take this, does it make success? Well, not really. You've got to put these things together. Cause is not something you find, it's something you construct. Because you can look back and say, that's relevant, and that's relevant. What we need to say is, why didn't the operator, the diver, whoever, swap off? And this final piece, which appears an awful lot, unfortunately, if you conclude with human error, it's a waste of investigation. Yes, you can put stuff into a bucket that says human error, but that doesn't help you improve your learning because you don't look at the specifics. So the final piece, which again ties in with Randy's piece, knowing is not enough, we must apply it. And willing is not enough, we must do. When I finish my classes, people go, that's given me lots of things to think about. Great, now do something with it. And that requires you to think about how you can apply it and move on from that point of view. So, to that end, I think I'll get back on schedule now, striking. Any questions? Stunned. Everybody's going to walk out and go, it's given me a lot to think about. Right, this is it, do it. And if you'd like a book to help you get there, there's some over there and we can talk about it afterwards. So, there we go.